Hello and welcome back to Behind the Faders, the channel where we talk about all aspects of live sound mixing and live sound in general. And if you're interested in that kind of content, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. It is free for you and helps me a lot. Thank you. So today I want to talk about why I think that it's not very helpful or beneficial for beginners that every little cheap digital desk comes loaded with tons of tools and features and toys. So to make my point, let's go back in time a little. This was the first mixing console I ever used in my life. Of course, long before I became a sound engineer. And maybe even this desk was the reason that I eventually became a sound engineer, because this was the first time I discovered how much fun it is to mix music. But have a look at it. Yes, it has an inbuilt tape delay, but it has 8 channels, and there are 3 knobs on each channel. And I have no idea what these knobs did. One of them was probably a gain, one was probably some kind of an EQ, and the third one might have been the amount of tape delay being applied to that channel. Or it was completely different, I have no idea. But looking at this desk, you can pretty much figure out how easy it was to wrap your head around it, because there was not a lot to discover. Now, the first professional desk I ever used was this one. This was a Soundcraft Series 1. And it had 16 channels. It had a 4-way fixed frequency EQ and 2 aux synths. And I'm pretty sure there was another version of that later on that had semi-parametric EQs in the mids. But I couldn't find a picture of it. But again, this is already like a fully equipped desk for the time. But there's also not too much to explore, and you could really get to know the things that were in it. And by the way, I used this desk with no outboard at the beginning, nothing. Then later on, I got booked for a show, and I was given maybe 2 channels worth of compression and 2 channels worth of a noise gate. Next time around, I had 4 of each, and my first reverb unit. Next time around, I had a reverb unit and a delay, but you get the point. It grew slowly and naturally. Now, it took years before I finally found myself in front of a setup like this. This picture was taken during the setup phase of a big German television show called the Echo Award. That used to be the kind of the European Grammys, and I've done them quite often, really. This is all high-end professional stuff. It's a Yamaha PM4000 console with lots of expensive, great reverb machines like the Lexicon 480, which was kind of top-notch. But now imagine if somebody would have put me in front of a setup like this when I was only starting my career. On the one hand side, I would have been so curious to play with all of it and see what it does. But of course, on the other side, and more importantly, it would have been completely overwhelming, and it would not have been any beneficial to my mix. But this is pretty much the setup that beginners will find today when they're only starting out. By the way, I'm not talking about sound quality here, of course, because all this equipment that you just saw, every piece of it is light years better than what you will find in a small digital console nowadays. I'm talking about the quantity, the amount of toys there were in this picture, because it pretty much equals the amount of stuff you find in any small beginner's digital desk. And I see the results. Every once in a while, I see a young sound engineer who treated it very, very well, apparently. So he has all the basics and fundamentals together that he needs for mixing, but he also wrapped his head around all the new toys and possibilities and options they gave him. So they're starting doing very creative stuff with effects and plugins. It was impressive. They did a very good job, and they did things that were, some of them were really beyond me. But what I see more often are young engineers that just programmed a monster of a desk file just because they could, no particular reason. And they can't handle it at times. Sometimes things sound very weird all of a sudden, and then they need a lot of time figuring out which of the 1,000 plugins is responsible for it. Or even worse, they start the sound check and they can't get anything out of their desk because somewhere inside the routing madness, there's something muted or a fader is down. So, and the results they're getting are somewhere from not very good to somewhat okay, but I've never heard any really great mix from one of these guys. And by the way, this also happened to successful senior engineers when they transitioned from analog to digital, being carried away by all these new options. And my best example is actually an engineer who mixed Joe Cocker. Little background on this: the first time I ever saw Joe Cocker live was a festival back in the 90s. And at the time, Joe Cocker was mixed by a guy called Dave Natal. If you're not familiar with the name, Dave is one of the world champions in this job. And he was always known for using very, very little outboard. And he has worked for Lenny Kravitz, Tina Turner. I think he's still doing the Rolling Stones up to this day. And he's still on analog with very little outboard. So as far as I know, no reverbs or anything like that. And back then, when Joe Cocker started playing Our Jaws Drop, because it sounded so fantastic, which is, of course, also because of the quality of the band. He had a fantastic band, but it just sounded awesome. Now, fast forward to maybe around 2012 or so, not too long before Joe Cocker passed away. It was probably his last show in Germany ever. And again, it was a festival, and my expectations were high, thinking about how far technology had come since the 90s, especially in terms of sound systems. And this guy brought a DigiDesign desk, which is of course now Avid. And these desks were really popular and maybe still are in a way, because it was the same company that made Pro Tools. So on these desks, you could use any Pro Tools plugin there was. So when they started sound checking, first of all, the band sounded good. But when Joe started singing, it was just a phasey, thin, alien-sounding mess. And I was devastated. But after soundcheck, the guy even showed me his vocal channel, and he had stacked up like 10 plugins on this poor one vocal channel. So it couldn't work. So you got carried away by the options, just like it happens to young people. So how could you handle this starting out? First of all, there's one advantage compared to back then. Back then, being a sound engineer was not a real official profession. It was not a real job. It was something you wanted to do, and you somehow wormed your way into this business. Today, if you want to become a sound engineer, you will most likely start as a trainee in some company, and you become an event technician, with then eventually specializing in sound. So I hope when you start using desks, you have some good guidance. You have somebody who talks to you about the risks and the way to do it and how to handle it and how to start it slow. However, I don't say don't ever play with all the features. It will be probably just too hard not to do it. So if you're in a warehouse of your shop and you have some time, or sometimes the companies even let you take a little desk home over the weekend if they don't use it, and then play with it. Play with it as much as you want. All I'm saying is never use anything you're not familiar with when you actually mix a show. Only use what you already know, or what you already have under control. Maybe you can introduce like maybe one more features every so often and become familiar with it and confident with it. And once you've done that, you can introduce the next feature. That will be the route I would like it to take. So with that said, that's it for today. I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.